So I'll tell you two things I'm not. I'm not a VR experience, and I'm not pizza, right? So there's a lot of other things going on in this building that might be a little bit more interesting, but I think you're going to enjoy this. From an Nvidia standpoint, I always start presentations, and I never want to assume people know who we are. In this crowd, I'm kind of thinking you do, but anybody doesn't know what Nvidia or who Nvidia is? Okay, well, you'll learn a little bit potentially from here, but I'm not doing any corporate information. And watch what you say to each other, because there's a lot of Nvidia folks in the room that might hear the comments. And I was joking around with people, like, me presenting here is like going to a Tour de France conference and talking about bicycles, right? Because you guys, this is what you do, right? You live, eat, and breathe virtual reality information. From a community standpoint or from a business standpoint, look at how many companies that we're sort of tracking ourselves, over 40,000 employees within this whole VR mix, and so far 3.8 billion raised in capital, right? We get calls all the time, people in Series A funding, Series B, and you read VR, Upload VR and Road to VR, amazing how much money is being thrown into this industry all the time. So where does Nvidia fit in, right? People know us as a graphics company. We're a graphics card company. If you're manufacturers, if you design cars, if you're in healthcare, we have embedded stuff in automobiles. We're doing autonomous driving, right? The last 8 years, every visual effects film that was nominated for an Oscar was designed and done on Nvidia. For VR, right, we're sort of at the core of virtual reality. So in this market, in this ecosystem, you've got your headset manufacturers, you've got the capture and streaming companies, Jaunt, Video Stitch, things like that. Engines, right? Everything starts with an engine typically, whether it's Unity, Unreal, Epic, Crytek, Stingray, now owned by Autodesk. And then application developers, so CATIAs, Autodesk, there's a lot of software companies. Do you want the mic?
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of software companies that are doing the development themselves. So for end users, you could, for end user companies, you could say, hey, you know what, I'm going to let Unity do all the work, but if you have the staff yourselves, you could potentially implement the work on your own, right? Some people build their own engines, don't rely on the third-party stuff. So first thing, right, in terms of, before I talk about the pro and the enterprise stuff of VR, let's talk a look about what's the personal entertainment stuff, right? So everybody thinks that gaming might be the low-hanging fruit and might be the way that VR really starts to get out to the masses, right? I just read an article just last week that now maybe the head-mounted displays are too expensive and it might not be as easy as people thought. But what are good applications for that type of personal entertainment? Sports, to go to a concert you may never have been able to be before, at a band that doesn't exist anymore. Cinematic VR, right? A movie, right? You can't get to a theater, but you can download that experience online. Travel, a school system. Hard to take a class of third graders to Europe, but easy to do it in a classroom with head-mounted displays. And obviously you've seen a lot of press recently about retail and shopping experiences and what's eBay going to do in the VR world, because it's starting to happen right now. When I talk about professional, and I didn't really go into graphic card nomenclature. When it comes to visualization, we have two product lines. We have a gaming line that's called GeForce, and we have a professional line of cards that's called Quadro. In the pro space, so not the previous slide, I take a look at medical. Boston, this is a pretty big area for medical up in this space. Architecture, another big industry up in the Northeast. Design, obviously, whether it's automobile or things like that. Manufacturing, but the big key of this is collaboration. That last bucket here that I'm kind of blocking for some people, sorry. Collaboration is, you want to take a look at an automobile. What do you think about it? I'm going to see your expression, so I know you don't really like the way the fender looks, and you hate that color because I can tell. So collaboration in VR, you kind of take that away, and it doesn't exist anymore, right? So what's important in the value of the experience, right? Scale. Specifically from a design standpoint, right? You want to take a look at, how large is that building? Before I even break ground, what's the house going to look like? What's my corporate headquarters going to look like? And you can actually take a look at that demo over there when I'm done. And what's the natural interaction? Where's haptic technology, and what do I feel, or what can my hands do? Because in real life, I can see my hands and I can see my feet. So there's a lot of things that, to make the experience as good as possible, this starts to happen. And as I said on the last slide, the biggest piece, which might be like a real missing link today, is the collaboration, right? What are the tools that can allow you and me to share an environment, to hear you, to see what you think about something? And that's kind of missing, but we think that it's important to where the industry is going to go. So right now, the picture on the left, the caves and domes, those have been around for a while, right? VR, to some people, it's like brand new, or maybe it's the old new, because flight simulators and things like that have been going on for a long time. But, and we're used to walking through caves, and I'm used to coming into a room this size, and we can take a look at what the theme park's going to look like, or what the auditorium's going to look like. But HMDs are now opening up this appeal to the masses, right? But how are we going to go through that experience that people are used to in the past, and how are we going to make it as good, if not better, in an HMD VR environment today? Some of the technology, and you guys know this because this is your space, in that cave environment, right? For a good experience in a traditional environment, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second could get you a good experience, right? You could actually go through, and whether it's a 6 projector throw, you could go through a room, ceiling, floor, all walls, and see that in real time at 30 to 60 frames per second. And we know in VR it's 90 frames per second. So FPS, or frames per second, is a huge, huge jump in this space. It's 8 times more the graphics compute necessity in VR than from a traditional CAD environment, or 7 times more than a 1080 game. So we love that. That's a great stat for us, because if you need 8 times more the graphics compute, that's a good thing. Frames per second, as I said, is something that's important. Latency is also, right, photon to motion. I don't want to get that motion sickness feel, which is easy, right? I would think most people who have done a VR experience, if you've done a lot, you have done good ones, and you've done bad ones, right? I'm fighting a cold, so I'm going to take some water breaks. So don't shake my hand. Don't shake my hand. And the way to overcome this is you've got to go from the lens through the GPU to the head-mounted display in as low latency as possible, probably under 20 milliseconds, right? To get out of that sickness environment and make sure it's a great experience as you move your head, you're tracking properly. So for us and for the professional space, again, whether it be design or manufacturing, we're doing a few things, right? We're talking about what are VR-ready systems, right? A lot of times, whatever you might have in your home or what you're working in your office may not be capable technically of hitting the frames per second or hitting that latency threshold to get you that best VR experience as possible. So we're doing something that's called VR-ready, right? The machine that's in the corner back there, VR-ready. There's another laptop that we're showing here, VR-ready. The other demos that you'll see in the other room meet that threshold so that the experience for you as an end user is going to be the best as it possibly can. The other thing that we're doing is something called VRWorks, right? VRWorks is an application suite, right? It's an SDK, which stands for Software Development Kit. It'd be interesting for people to know that there's more software folks in Nvidia than there are hardware people. And you would think, well, gosh, don't you do cards? We do, but we are all about software, SDKs, drivers, programming environments that we call CUDA. But for VR, and I'm going to talk about it in 2 slides, you'll understand what I mean from a software situation. So, 3 slides. So the VR-ready desktop platforms like I talked about, and you can go on our website. It's the same thing. I'm here to talk about enterprise, so I reference workstation partners of ours like in Lenovo. You'll see a P500 over there. There's Dell, there's HP, there's Box, and others that are being certified. So when a large corporate account says, hey, I'm going to do something and I'm going to start my project, they know without a doubt this is the CPU that's needed, this is the GPU that's needed, this is the workstation that's required to do that task, right? And we talk about what the recommended configurations are. And obviously, we're sort of HMD agnostic, right? There's 2 major players in the industry, but we're okay with whatever might happen in the industry. We have technology that can enable that and help that, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Another thing that's hard for some of the enterprise customers, if you're a service company and you want to go on site and talk to somebody about the architectural layout that you're about to do for them, or you want to talk about, there's a medical problem that you might have and I want to kind of walk you through a CAT scan and a 3D volume in VR. Hard to take that workstation in the back corner, sorry Jerry, on your back. So mobile workstations is another thing that we think is going to be prevalent, right? Easy to go, easy to demo, convenient for you as end users and companies to take that rig from place to place without too much hassle. From a software standpoint, right? Think of Nvidia and VR as a platform, right? So I talked a little bit about hardware, whether it's our graphics cards or our partners' hardware workstations, but we also have a comprehensive suite of SDKs, and as I said, software development kits. And it goes for, when I say developers in the VR space, right, the easiest thing to think about is, well, if I'm not Epic, why would I care about this? I don't work for Unity, what does it matter, right? As I said earlier, you can start with a game engine and let them do the hard work, or you could be software savvy yourself that if you get open source, and some of the engines Unity does, you could start to take advantage of some of these tools yourselves, right? So we've got different things for graphics to, again, increase frames per second, lower the latency. We have technologies called multi-res and VRSLI. How do I have two GPUs in one system, one worried about the left eye and one worried about the right eye to get that experience as good as possible? We have a whole set of tools for head-mounted display vendors, right? Direct mode to kind of get the Windows nonsense out of the equation and go right to the head-mounted display from the graphics card. Recently, we just introduced something called AudioWorks. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today, and again, it depends on what your environment is. Audio is so important, right? I'm going to talk, my industry is media entertainment, right? I've been doing a lot of VR, but I'm sort of from media entertainment. What a directorial nightmare in VR when you can't control where you're looking at, right? The theaters are easy because you're stuck to the screen. In VR, if something's happening to my right, how do I get you there? Audio, right? And it's so important, and we have tools, and I'll talk a little bit about that quickly. And then when I talk about this, again, I'm blocking some people. At NVIDIA, we think about VR as an immersive environment. So an immersive environment could be head-mounted displays, or it could be a cave or a multi-screen type projection. And we have tools that enable that, no tearing. You can scale up to 16 displays across. We also think that's immersive. We think that's VR, and we have tools for that. If you do follow us, I saw a hand over there that did not know NVIDIA. No pizza for you tonight. But for those that do know NVIDIA and that's been kind of tracking us, you've seen this announcement in the press a lot, right? So there was our first graphics card was introduced not too long ago, the 1080. It's a GeForce 1080. And then you've seen some information about a P100, which is on the professional side, but it's the Pascal architecture, right? Not getting into too much details, but we're doing a transition from one to the other. For those that are paying attention and know us and follow us, we're transitioning from what we call Maxwell into Pascal. Maxwell actually did some hardware features that were very, very good for virtual reality, and Pascal is doing the same thing. So there's something called, under the simultaneous multi-projection label that we have from the software standpoint, we have something called single pass stereo. So in one pass, we get to render both views, left and right, again, increasing the performance. Lens match shading is sort of like a stage 2 of what we call multi-res shading. Multi-res shading was something, computers like to do rectangles, but HMDs are fish-eyed, it's kind of warped, and how do you do that in a computer? So multi-res would sort of take that screen and chop it up into viewports, and as I'm looking at you, I see the person in the orange shirt, but he's kind of fuzzy, so I don't really want to worry about too much render time, and I don't want to worry about too much compute on him, because I'm looking at you. That's sort of what the multi-res technology does in a VR standpoint, again, to increase the frames per second to make that experience as best as it can be. I talked a little bit about audio and how important audio is. It could be a driving simulation. It could be a travel simulation, right? Now you're going through, the forest, or you're going through a safari somewhere and you want to hear birds chirping and gorillas moving around. VRWorks Audio kind of takes technology that we have called optics. Optics is ray tracing technology, and what that means is how does light bounce and refract off something? I'm under a light right now, it's bouncing off my glasses and maybe hitting my watch. That's the natural environment. So we do that in graphics. We're also taking that optic technology and doing it in audio, right? The way I sound now in this room would be different than the way I sound in one of those closed booths, or if I'm in that conference room and I close the door. So if you're in a VR environment that's simulating a room like this, the audio needs to simulate a room like this. My voice needs to bounce off that wall, reflect to you that way, as real as possible. So with our VRWorks, SDK, we're enabling developers to start to implement that, because if you're not triggered to go right, or if you're in an environment that just does not feel real, that's a bad experience. Some other things that we've been doing, and this did start sort of in the gaming world. So a lot of the engine providers, whether it be Unity or Unreal or Crytek, are there a lot of who's a gamer in this room? Okay, so I know I'm not a huge gamer. I think I still have like a Nintendo 64 in my house. That's old school. But how realistic have games gotten over the past few years, right? It is so photoreal, it's kind of crazy. And what our tools do is it simulates flesh and hair and water and cloth, all the materials that make that environment as best as it can be. That physics technology, we've taken that and sort of call it VR Touch or Physics VR, and this is a tool that, again, with haptic devices, we're giving the developers the option that when you cut through Jello, it's going to be different than cutting through pizza or cutting through wood. And this physics feedback is going to start to make the environment, again, development standpoint, right? So the engine folks need to get on board with this. But when everything gets immersed and you have the haptic devices on your hands and your feet, and you immerse yourself into an environment, you want it to be as realistic as it is today in the real world. So again, I talk about like VRWorks, and I say developers, and I kind of fault it to Unity and Unreal, again, based on who you work for and what your staff is like. At GDC, which is the Game Developer Conference, and then at a conference that we ourselves did at Nvidia called GTC, we had the ability to run ILMX labs, or The Force Awakens, right? Trials of Tatooine was the demo that they did. So if you're Star Wars fans, there's actually a VR experience, not released yet to the public, but it's been out there. ILM, because they have a lot of software folks, they off an engine that did not implement VRSLI, they themselves did. So when I talk about these toolkits and these SDKs, you're sitting there going, well, no, I mean, I'm not Unity. You don't need to be Unity, right? It depends on who your staff is and what you have on board from a development situation as to what you can incorporate yourselves. So that's why I talk about these, because don't just close it down to, well, I don't work for a game engine. Doesn't matter, right? If these tools are necessary for you guys, then it's something that could be done if you have the staff or you find a third-party company to help you with it, right? Again, it could be the multi-res shading, the VRSLI, the thing on the bottom. As I said, I come from the M&E, media and entertainment industry, so I go to the broadcast show. It's called NAB. It's where everybody can see the latest camera technology and things like that. It was a big VR experience at this show. It's a traditional show. It's an old-school show, but this was the first time that it really had a VR experience. But it was a lot of stitching, right? So you think, how would the local ABC station use VR? It'd probably be a 360 stitching type environment, because that's the broadcast way. GPU Direct for Video is another tool that, implemented in our development kit, allows you to composite effects and do graphics with very low latency. So that VR experience that you're about to get into, moving your head around, as a company, you could overlay graphics in that environment. You could do advertising in that environment. That's necessary, right? There has to be a money pull in this world, and technologies like this enable things. And again, as I said, just a few technologies. Again, you're not going to see it today because we're very HMD at this, or head-mounted display at this event. But if you've got scalable viz, you have a room with multiple walls, and you want to go into a manufacturing review and see what does the car look like, or what does that gyroscope look like, or things like that, there are tools that let you take one display, expand it all over the place. And again, things like warp and blend, bezel correction, so you can synchronize as many displays with no tearing and no skipping from one to the other. And like I said, you guys might be so focused on head-mounted displays that this type of an immersive experience may not resonate, but for NVIDIA, it does, so we like to talk about it. How many head-mounted display vendors are there? Okay, excellent. But we have kits and tools for them too. All these SDKs, they're on our website. You can just download them. They're free, right? So we have a big developer community, right? So we always try to promote as many tools that make your software development environment the best it can possibly be, and we're there to help. And you can just register and download it to start to experience it. As I said, and I'm now being repetitive, let the engine company do it for you, and to help us, tell them you'd like them to do it for you, right? Because you've seen something that Nvidia does, you've experienced something over there that in the environment you're about to get into, if you don't have it, you might think of some other engine. So whatever you can do to help us, help us build the ecosystem as we do it ourselves. So here's a quick slide on who's sort of adopted our stuff and who's potentially using our VR work stuff. And as you take a look at the names on this slide, it's all the major players, right? Whether it's Audi or ILM, it could be all the major engine companies, including Autodesk, and there's a demo over there, VRED or VRED. We're really, really into it. In the pro space, right, and the next slide is going to kind of go more towards architecture, right? We introduced something called iRay, and it wasn't a recent introduction. We've had it for a while. It's a photoreal ray tracing piece of software, right? Available today. People here might use 3ds Max, they might use Maya, they might use Cinema 4D or CATIA. Those might be your design packages. iRay gives you that photoreal environment of what you're seeing on the picture right here, right? So what we've done is we've taken iRay in the normal manufacturing and development environment, and we're moving it to the VR world. There's a demo over there of our corporate headquarters that will let you step into a room of what our lobby is going to look like, and it's as photoreal as can be. This is compute intensive, right? So we've done demos before where we're actually running it on 16 GPUs. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. So when you take a look at iRay VR, right, the way it works is you've got light probes around the environment, and you can, we worry about the rasterization of the depth. But again, in this environment, it's almost going to resolve to final, right? Or you pre-bake it, and then you move around the environment as final, right? We're going to do something because y'all might not want to get 16 or 32 GPUs tomorrow morning. So what about, how do I do it for myself? And I'm a consumer, what do I do with that? So VR Lite, iRay VR Lite. So it'll be something that through the plugins, again, like I said, 3ds Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, CATIA, you can start to get this plug-in tool for iRay VR and potentially put it through with a plugin and use it on cardboard or whatever your mobile device might want to be. So that kind of gets it more to the masses. And then if you work for like a Gensler, then you're going to get the 16 GPUs because you want to sell Coca-Cola on the new headquarters that they're building. But it's going to be available for everybody because we're doing this plug-in mode that you could eventually use it in some type of a phone scenario. I'm almost done, which is the good news. I'm going to talk a little bit about case studies, right? And again, this is just to kind of get you thinking. This is a situation of a company called McCarthy Builders, right? So they're like an architectural firm, and they kind of specialize in the medical space. So this is an environment where they built this room before they go into a hospital, and they let the doctors and nurses put on an HMD and say, okay, my chair turn is here to grab this table. The patient is this far away from me in this environment. And they're using VR and they're using our tools to build this environment. What a great proof of concept as you try to sell a hospital system about what the new portion of the medical facility is going to look like. Another great example of Ford, it's their immersive VR environment, or 5. This woman, Elizabeth Barron, I believe is her name, and they walk around the actual model and they converse on, do you like the design? Is this the style we're going for? What's your comments on it? But everything goes into this type of scenario in a VR environment where they're walking around the models. The other experience that I showed, I had Audi listed on the slide, right? Audi is doing a dealership environment, right? So you just drove an Audi and it was white with beige interior. You love the way it rode, but your husband or wife not into the white color. They want pink with gold rims. So they don't have a pink with gold rims on the lot, unfortunately, so what are you going to do? what you're going to do at the dealership is you're going to put on a VR headset and you're going to look at what that car is in that color that you want and what the rims look like and what the interior is. You know how it drives. Now you get to see the car that you're eventually going to buy through VR. They're rolling that out today. Great use case. This is another one. I actually, I'm not a doctor, but I played one in VR, I guess. Can I say that? So this is a company, Surgical Theater, right? And this was a partnership with UCLA Medical, and they're actually doing neurosurgery. So they allow surgeons to practice tumor removal, right? Because sometimes you can cut the tumor out, sometimes where the veins lie you can't, so you have to cut some out, extract others through a tube, and then chemo the rest of it, or radiation the rest of it. So they're all about the patient experience, letting parents know what's going to happen to the child and what's happening to your spouse. And I'd pay if my surgeon could have practiced 200 times before I go under anesthesia. That's a pretty good use case. And again, and cinematic, right back to this. I did this at Sundance, and I did this at another show. Just an 8-minute short of what this life was like in a bomb-ridden territory where things were just awful, right? And I would never want to be there, but in VR, I have a chance to experience it. I'll close with, you guys, every day, you kind of check together, what's it going to be? Grew up in Boston. I live down south. So if I've said y'all, that's because I've been an Atlanta guy for 25 years. My daughter goes to the University of Alabama. So I was talking to a weather company about what are you doing for VR, and they said I'm not doing anything. And I go, well, I said my daughter goes to school in Tornado Alley, right? And I said I'd never want to be in a tornado, and I'd never want her to be in a tornado. But what if you could teach her in VR what it would be like and what the right safety steps should be if she ever happens to be in that situation? Right, that's a good learning teaching aid, and just everything you can think of. Right, sky's the limit in this space, right? And we're just trying to bring the tools together to make the sort of development experience the best it can possibly be, to keep your performance as high as it can be, so that your VR experience is what you thought it would be as you got into the event. That is my last slide. I appreciate everybody's attention. Thank you very much.